So, in this concluding hangout on the chapter of surrender by Aurobindo, and we are reading the letters on yoga. And the next subchapter is surrender and tapasya. Tapasya is the effort, the yogic effort. Yoga is an endeavor, a tapasya. It can cease to be so only when one surrenders sincerely to a higher action and keeps the surrender and makes it complete. It is not a fantasia, devoid of all reason and coherence, or a mere miracle. It has its laws and conditions, and I do not see how you can demand of the divine to do everything by a violent miracle. When the will and energy are concentrated and used to control the mind, vital and physical, and change them or to bring down the higher consciousness, or for any other yogic purpose or high purpose, that is called tapasya. So it is a concentrated will to do a yoga. Tapasya has predominated in your sadhana, for you have a fervor and active energy which predisposes you to that. No way is entirely easy, and in that of surrender the difficulty is to make a true and complete surrender. Once it is made, it certainly makes things easier. Not that things are all done in no time or that there are no difficulties, but there is an assurance, a support, an absence of tension, which gives the consciousness rest as well as strength and freedom from the worst forms of resistance. Yeah, that's very interesting. An absence of tension. Nowadays, in these days of burnout syndrome, the absence of tension would be very welcome, I think. So do it. Try surrender. Try surrendering to the divine. Yes, of course, you're right. The process of surrender is itself a tapasya. Not only so, but in fact a double process of tapasya, and increasing surrender persists for a long time even when the surrender has fairly well begun. But a time comes when one feels the presence and the force constantly, and more feels that this is doing everything, so that the worst difficulties cannot disturb the sense, and personal effort is no longer necessary. And personal effort is no longer necessary, hardly even possible. That is a sign of the full surrender of the nature into the hands of the divine. There are some who take the position in faith even before there is this experience, and if the bhakti and the faith are strong, it carries them through till the experience is there. But all cannot take this position from the beginning. And for some, it would be dangerous, since they might put themselves into the hand of a wrong force, thinking it to be the divine. For most, it is necessary to grow through tapasya into surrender. Yes, there is the sense of the divine will behind all the tapasya, and receiving it and bestowing the fruit, it is at least a first form of surrender. Surrender and personal effort. There are always two ways of doing the yoga. One, by the action of a vigilant mind and vital, seeing, observing, thinking, and deciding what is or is not to be done. Of course, it acts with the divine force behind it, drawing or calling in that force, for otherwise nothing much can be done. But still it is the personal effort that is prominent and assumes most of the burden. The other way is that of the psychic being, the consciousness opening to the divine, not only opening the psychic and bringing it forward, but opening the mind, the vital and the physical, receiving the light, perceiving what is to be done, feeling and seeing it done by the divine force itself, and helping constantly by its own vigilant and conscious assent to and call for the divine working. Usually, there cannot be a mixture of these two ways until the consciousness is ready to be entirely open, entirely submitted to the divine's origination of all its action. It is then all responsibility disappears. It is then that all responsibility disappears, and there is no personal burden on the shoulders of the sadhak. There are two possibilities, one of purification by personal effort, which takes a long time, another by a direct intervention of the divine grace, which is usually rapid in its action. For the latter there must be a complete surrender and self-giving, and for that again usually it is necessary to have a mind that can remain quiet and allow the divine force to act, supporting it with its complete adhesion at every step, but otherwise remaining still and quiet. This last condition, which resembles the baby cat attitude spoken of by Ramakrishna, is difficult to have. Those who are accustomed to a very active movement of their thought and will in all they do find it difficult to still the activity and adopt the quietude of mental self-giving. This does not mean that they cannot do the yoga or cannot arrive at self-giving. Only the purification and the self-giving take a long time to accomplish, and one must have the patience and steady perseverance and the resolution to grow. If there is not complete surrender, then it is not possible to adopt the baby cat attitude. It becomes mere tamasic passivity, calling itself surrender. If a complete surrender is not possible in the beginning, it follows that the personal effort is necessary. In the early part of the sadhana, and by early I do not mean a short part, effort is indispensable. Surrender, of course, but surrender is not a thing that is done in a day. The mind has its ideas, and it clings to them. The human vital resists surrender, for what it calls surrender in the early stages is a doubtful kind of self-giving with a demand in it. The physical consciousness is like a stone, and what it calls surrender is often no more than inertia. It is only the psychic that knows how to surrender, and the psychic is usually very much veiled in the beginning. When the psychic awakes, it can bring a sudden and true surrender of the whole being, for the difficulty of the rest is rapidly dealt with and disappears. But till then effort is indispensable, or else it is necessary till the force comes flooding down into the being from above and takes up the sadhana. Does it for one more and more and leaves less and less to individual effort. But even then, if not effort, at least aspiration and vigilance are needed till the possession of mind, will, life and body by the divine power is complete. I have dealt with this subject, I think, in one of the chapters of the Mother. On the other hand, there are some people who start with a genuine and dynamic will for total surrender. It is those who are governed by the psychic or are governed by a clear and enlightened mental will, which, having once accepted surrender as a law of the sadhana, will stand no nonsense about it and insists on the other parts of the being following its direction. Here there is still effort, but it is so ready and spontaneous, and has so much the sense of a greater force behind it, that the sadhak hardly feels that he is making an effort at all. In the contrary case of a will in mind or vital to retain self-will, a reluctance to give up your independent movement, there must be struggle and endeavor until the wall between the instrument in front and the divinity behind or above is broken. No rule can be laid down which applies without distinction to everybody. The variations in human nature are too great to be covered by a single transient rule. It is not possible to get rid of the stress on personal effort at once, and not always desirable, for personal effort is better than tamasic inertia. The personal effort has to be transformed progressively into a movement of the divine force. If you feel conscious of the divine force and call it in more and more to govern your effort, to take it up, to transform it in something not yours but the Mother's, period. There will be a sort of transfer, a taking up of the forces at work in the personal Adar, a transfer not suddenly complete but progressive. The Adar is the system of our individual planes and parts of the being, our physical body, our vital, our mental, and so on. But the psychic poise is necessary. The discrimination must develop which sees accurately what is the divine force, what is the element of personal effort, and what is brought in as a mixture from the lower cosmic forces. And until the transfer is complete, which always takes time, there must always be a personal contribution, a constant consent to the true force, a constant rejection of any lower mixture. That is very important. At present, to give up personal effort is not what is wanted, but to call in more and more the divine power and govern and guide by it the personal endeavor. It is not advisable in the early stages of the sadhana to leave everything to the divine, or to accept everything from it without the need of one's own endeavor. That is only possible when the psychic being is in front and influencing the whole action. And even then, vigilance and a constant assent are necessary, or else, later on in the ultimate stages of the yoga, when a direct or almost direct supramental force is taking up the consciousness. But this stage is very far away as yet. Under other conditions, this attitude is likely to lead to stagnation and inertia. See the Mother, Part 1. It is only the more mechanical part of the being that can truly say that they are helpless. The physical material consciousness especially is inert in its nature and moved either by the mental and vital or by the higher forces. But one has always the power to put the mental will or vital push at the service of the divine. One cannot be sure of the immediate result, for the obstruction of the lower nature or the pressure of the adverse forces can often act successfully for a time, even for a long time, against the necessary change. One has then to persist, to put always the will on the side of the divine, rejecting what has to be rejected, opening oneself to the true light and the true force, calling it down quietly, steadfastly, without tiring, without depression or impatience, until one feels the divine force at work and the obstacles beginning to give way. You say you are conscious of your ignorance and obscurity. If it is only a general consciousness, that is not enough. But if you are conscious of it in the details and in its actual workings, then that is sufficient to start with. You have to reject steadfastly the wrong workings of which you are conscious and make your mind and vital a quiet and clear field of the action of the divine force. Certainly, one ought not to fret above whether one will achieve one's end, and certainly one ought to dedicate one's desire to achieve it to the divine. But our experience is that merely leaving the divine to do everything, to fulfill, does not carry one very far. There must be cooperation, a consent, an inspiration, a will to change. If there were no conditions at all in yoga, then there would be no need of sadhana. All would be done automatically by the force or help without any need of effort by the sadhak. The help is always there and it has pulled you out of many difficulties and attacks. It is, I suppose, because of the feeling I do not want to do anything, that you have not been able to receive the help, but that is a temporary inertia of the physical mind and will. I do not see the use of your going back for a few months to a life which could not now satisfy you. The only course is to shake off the inertia of the will and preserve. So long as there is not the full presence and conscious working of the higher force, some amount of personal effort is indispensable. To do the sadhana for the sake of the divine and not for one's own sake is, of course, the true attitude. Faith, reliance upon God, surrender and self-giving to the divine power are necessary and indispensable. But reliance upon God must not be made an excuse for indolence, weakness, and surrender to the impulses of the lower nature. It must go along with untiring aspiration and the persisting rejection of all that comes in the way of the divine truth. The surrender to the divine must not be turned into an excuse, a cloak or an occasion for surrender to one's own desires and lower movements, or to one's ego, or to some force of the ignorance and darkness that puts on a false appearance of the divine. It is always better to make an effort in the right direction, even if one fails, the effort bears some result, and it is never lost. For those who do not make any effort, the absence of an effort is itself a difficulty, they do not progress. Okay, the next chapter would be on faith. I'm not sure if I will read this chapter, but this at least in this order given in the book. The next chapter would be faith, belief, confidence, trust, and so on. Okay, I stop here now. This hangout. Hope it's interesting for you. I will decide for the next hangout what to read.